If you're thinking about getting a super capable mid-sized tablet, there's no doubt that the Samsung Galaxy Tab S9 and the iPad Air 5 are two outstanding options. Keep in mind that the Tab S9 is a much newer option because Apple has not released an update to the iPad Air 5 as of yet. Now, there are some really interesting things to consider when you look at the configuration options and prices, and there's definitely some critical differences that you need to know about before buying one. Plus, one area where one of these companies could have done more and one of them definitely should have done more. Starting out with the displays, both tablets are fully laminated, but the specs, types of displays, and the aspect ratios are very different. So let's see which one is better for you. The Tab S9 has an 11-inch Dynamic AMOLED 2X display, which offers 120Hz adaptive refresh rate, a resolution of 1600 by 2560, and a pixel density of 274 pixels per inch. The iPad Air 5 has a slightly smaller 10.9-inch 60Hz P3 display with a resolution of 1640 by 2360 and 264 pixels per inch. And when we compare 11 inches to 10.9 inches, we're not talking about a significant difference, but the Tab S9 does have an aspect ratio of 16 by 10 versus approximately 3 by 2 on the iPad Air 5. This means that when you're watching a video, you'll get a larger image on the Tab S9 with much smaller black bars at the top and the bottom. So if that's a primary use case for you, keep that in mind. On the other hand, the iPad Air 5 will give you a wider tablet in portrait mode, which is nice when you're drawing or taking notes using the Apple Pencil. As far as refresh rate, the Tab S9 has an adaptive 120Hz display, meaning that it can adjust the refresh rate on the fly to balance providing a fluid and responsive user experience and maximizing battery life. The iPad Air 5 has a 60Hz display, so user interface animations and scrolling are not as smooth. Now, as far as the quality of the display, they're both quite good when you're playing games, watching movies, surfing the web, or editing photos and videos. But I'm definitely going to give the edge to the Tab S9. The image quality is just fantastic, and I love that Samsung now offers their best display in all three tablet sizes. Now, one advantage of the iPad Air 5 is that the display is a little less reflective. So if you plan on using your tablet in bright environments or when you're outside and you have to deal with reflections, that might be a consideration. Now, when we look at the size and design, the Tab S9 and the iPad Air 5 look similar, but again, there are some important differences. So first of all, both tablets have 4 speaker grills, but the iPad Air 5 only has 2 speakers, whereas the Tab S9 actually has 4, and it provides fuller and richer audio. Now, as far as the overall construction, both are machined aluminum all the way around, and both have rounded corners, squared off edges, and small bezels. And I haven't had any issues with the build quality or with either of them bending. Now, having said that, the Tab S9 has an IP68 rating, so we're getting protection from water and dust. Obviously, this is important if you take your tablet with you when you travel or if you use it outside a lot, but even around the house, it's nice to have additional protection from accidental spills. Now, for biometric authentication, the iPad Air 5 has a fingerprint sensor built into the power button, and with the Tab S9, we're getting an under-display fingerprint sensor and the option for facial recognition. Now, both tablets offer a USB-C port for charging and connecting accessories, but one advantage of the Tab S9 is the micro SD card slot. It lets you expand the internal storage by up to 1 terabyte, and you can use this additional internal storage for files and for apps. Now, when it comes to charging, the Tab S9 doesn't come with a charger at all, and with the iPad Air 5, we are getting a 1-port charger. Now, if you're like me, regardless of whether you're at home, at work, or traveling, you always have more than one device to charge, which brings me to a couple of accessories. With the Ugreen 100-watt USB-C charger, I can charge one of my MacBooks with up to 100 watts from a single USB-C port, or split it up and charge 3 separate wire devices. And I love the fact that I still get 15 watts wireless charging from my iPhone 15 Pro Max, and I can have the iPhone pointed at a convenient angle in both landscape and portrait modes. When I travel, I use this 145-watt power bank. It has a 25,000 milliamp hour capacity, which is a ton. It has 2 USB-C ports and 1 USB-A port, and I can get up to 100 watts from a single port. It has a digital display, so I know exactly how much power power is remaining. And with bidirectional fast charging, I can actually charge two devices while recharging the power bank itself. And finally, if I want to have a little fun, I love the Nexode RG chargers. There's a 65-watt version with two USB-C ports and one USB-A port, so you can charge up to 3 devices at the same time. It can charge an iPhone 15 to about 60% in 30 minutes and an M2 MacBook Air to 70% in an hour. And if you only want to charge one device, there's a smaller 30-watt charger with one USB-C port. So check out the link in the description for up to 50% off Ugreen accessories, and thank you to Ugreen for sponsoring this portion of the video. Now back to the tablets. Another factor to consider is the ability to expand the functionality of each tablet by adding a keyboard case and a stylus. And there's some super important differences. Looking at the keyboard options, the iPad Air 5 is compatible with Apple's smaller Magic Keyboard and also has some great third-party options. The Tab S9 is compatible with 2 different versions of the book cover keyboards from Samsung, and of course you can always use an external Bluetooth keyboard with both tablets. Personally, I prefer the feel of the keys on the Magic Keyboard, and the trackpad is definitely better. The Magic Keyboard also has a USB-C pass-through, so you can charge your iPad while still being able to connect an accessory. Now moving on to stylus options, the iPad Air 5 is compatible with the 2nd generation Apple Pencil. It pairs wirelessly, it can be stored and charged on the side of the iPad, and it costs $130. It's also compatible with the newer USB-C Apple Pencil, which costs $79, but it doesn't offer features like pressure sensitivity, wireless pairing and charging, or the double tap functionality. Now the Tab S9 comes with a free S Pen, which pairs wirelessly. It can be stored on the side or on the back of the Tab S9, but it'll only charge on the back. And just like with the tablet itself, we're getting an IP68 rating. You can assign functions to the 2nd generation Apple Pencil Double Tap and the S Pen button, but the S Pen also has several Bluetooth functions, so you can use it for things like taking pictures or media playback. Now the S Pen doesn't need to be charged in order to write or draw. It's just for the Bluetooth functions, whereas the Apple Pencil does need to be charged for it to work at all. Now, practically speaking, this isn't really a meaningful difference to me because my Apple Pencil is always charging while it's being stored, and the battery lasts forever, but it's always something I want to mention. Now, in both cases, latency is very low, but the actual writing or drawing experience is very different. The Apple Pencil has a firm tip, so it's a little harsher when it hits the glass, and it feels like you're writing or drawing on a single sheet of paper that's placed on a hard surface. Now, the S Pen has a softer tip, so when it hits the glass, it gives a little, and it feels more like you're writing on a full pad of paper where the pages compress as you press down. Now, one isn't objectively better than the other for every use, and it's really going to come down to which one feels better for you, so hopefully the description was helpful. Now let's quickly discuss performance, where we'll talk about both benchmarks and real-life use. The Tab S9 comes with the new Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chip. The 128GB version comes with 8 gigs of RAM, and the 256GB version comes with 12 gigs of RAM. The iPad Air 5 comes with the M1 chip, and both the 64 and the 256GB models come with 8 gigs of RAM. Very quickly, when we look at benchmarks, we can see that even though the M1 is 2 generations behind Apple's latest version of their custom silicon chip, it still comes out ahead for single and multi-core performance. And it continues to perform great when we're looking at GPU performance. But what about day-to-day use when you're browsing the web, when you're using various productivity apps, playing games, or multitasking? Now, the Tab S9 comes with Android 13 and One UI 5.1, which I think does an excellent job at continuing to improve multitasking and the overall user experience. For example, you can use 3 tiled apps at the same time, and the Edge panel is super versatile. The iPad Air 5 can have 2 apps open side by side. You can have pop-up windows and slide over windows, and you can use the new multitasking menu to quickly see multiple windows within the same app. Now, both tablets can also be used as additional displays for compatible desktops and laptops. Apple calls this feature Sidecar, and Samsung calls it Second Screen. But the Tab S9 has one significant advantage when you want more of a laptop or desktop-like experience with DeX. If you're new to Samsung tablets, DeX essentially reboots the tablet with a UI that looks very similar to what you'd get on a laptop. You've got a taskbar, a desktop with icons, and you can run multiple floating windows or snap windows to the sides of the display. And you can connect an external monitor, keyboard, and mouse and run a dual display setup. Apple does offer Stage Manager with the iPad Air 5. You can use an external display without black bars, but overall, I'm going to give the edge to the Tab S9 and DeX. But when we look at apps and OS updates, things shift back in favor of the iPad. Now, there are a lot of apps in the Galaxy Store, the Google Play Store, and the Apple App Store, so the majority of users are easily going to find what they need. Some creative-specific apps like Affinity Photo and Procreate are only available for the iPad, so if you absolutely need those apps, go ahead and get the iPad Air. LumaFusion, which historically has been an iPad-only app, is now available for Android, which is great news, and at the same time, you can now use Final Cut Pro on the iPad Air. Notability is only available for the iPad, but GoodNotes has an Android version, and Samsung Notes is actually an excellent option, and it comes included with the Tab S9. Now, overall, I have to give the edge to the iPad Air 5 because almost every app is optimized for a tablet, and with the Tab S9, a lot of the apps are stretched out versions of the phone apps. As far as operating systems, Apple has always provided excellent long-term support. And while Samsung now offers 4 years of OS updates and 5 years of security updates, Apple still has the edge here if that's a priority for you. Now, when we look at the two ecosystems, we see that Samsung has continued to make some significant improvements over the past few years. They're adding things like integration between multiple devices, wireless file and text sharing, and then a few additional cross-device integrations. And while the gap continues to shrink, Apple's ecosystem is still more tightly integrated and more complete due to years of experience and the fact that they have full control over the hardware and the software. Now, moving on to battery life, comparing these devices when they were new, we're looking at about 10 hours of typical use on the iPad Air 5 versus about 12 to 14 on the Tab S9. Now, keep in mind that this completely depends on what you're doing. If you're watching a video over Wi-Fi, then you're using a lot less power than if you're gaming or rendering a video. Now, the Tab S9 is also capable of accepting faster charging at 45 watts versus 30 watts on the iPad Air 5. And remember that the iPad Air 5 does come with a 20-watt charger versus the Tab S9, which doesn't come with a charger at all. Now, before we get to gaming, let's quickly look at the camera system. Both cameras have ultra-wide 12-megapixel front-facing cameras. The iPad can record at up to 1080-60. The Tab S9 can go up to 4K 30, and here's a quick sample. Here's a camera and microphone test of the Tab S9 and the iPad Air 5. This should give you a pretty good idea of the type of image quality that you're going to get and the type of audio quality that you should expect. For video calls, I prefer the placement of the camera on the Tab S9 because it's in the center of the long edge, so I'm always properly framed. And it always appears as if I'm looking at the person that I'm talking to. On the iPad, because the camera is on the short side, when I'm watching the screen, the camera is to my left, and it looks like I'm looking away from the person that I'm talking to. Now, moving on to rear-facing camera modules, the Tab S9 has a 13-megapixel wide versus 12 megapixel on the iPad Air, and the iPad can record it up to 4K 60 versus 4K 30 on the Tab S9, and the iPad can also record in slow motion at up to 240 frames per second. Okay, so now let's get to gaming because I do a lot of gaming on tablets, and we have plenty of power on both devices. So basic games aren't going to be a problem, but even more demanding games run very smoothly. If you're playing PUBG on the Tab S9, you can go to HDR graphics with frame rate set to extreme, or you can go to Ultra HD for graphics and Ultra for frame rate. On the iPad Air 5, I can go up to balanced for graphics if I want extreme frame rate, and I can go to Ultra HD for graphics and Ultra for frame rate. I also ran Genshin Impact on both devices and had an extremely smooth and responsive gaming experience. Now, having said that, I'm going to give the edge to the iPad Air 5 because looking ahead and taking into account the fact that games will continue to demand more and more resources, the additional CPU and GPU performance headroom on the iPad Air 5 should become more meaningful. Now, both tablets also performed extremely well when paired with a controller and streaming games using Xbox Game Pass. Now, I played all of the usual games I play, but since we're primarily using these devices as displays, I'm going to give the edge to the Tab S9 because of the nicer display. Now we're getting to the part where I think one of these companies could have done better and one of them definitely should have done better. The Tab S9 starts out with 120 gigabytes of storage and 8 gigs of RAM for $799. Then 256 gigabytes and 12 gigs of RAM for $920. But right now, using the links in the description, you can actually get the higher end model for the same price as the lower end one. The iPad Air 5 also comes in 2 versions, and they both offer 8 gigabytes of RAM. The base model comes with 64 gigs for $599. Then there's a 256 gigabyte model for $749. So here are my thoughts about these decisions, starting with Samsung. I wish they brought back the 512 gigabyte option that was available on the Tab S7, even though they skipped it with the Tab S8, but I guess it's possible that there wasn't much demand for it because you can add internal storage with the micro SD card. Now with Apple, 64 gigabytes at this point is really low. Like the M1 chip is plenty powerful and it will continue to be a beast for so many years. But if you're the type of user who wants and needs that performance, like if you want to play games, 64 gigabytes are just not going to last you very long, and you're likely to have to delete games in order to install new ones. Now, I wish they used the same 128 and 512 gigabyte models that they offered with the M1 11-inch iPad Pro, especially since those chips are already being produced. But I'd love to know your thoughts on the storage options. Now you should check out how the 12.9-inch iPad Pro compares with the Tab S9 Plus. Hopefully this comparison was helpful. Click on my face to subscribe. You know what I always say, buy it nice or buy it twice. Good luck and see you soon.